So straight to the point, the build process has been really slow with the FD. And really it's just, sometimes you lose focus, you lose motivation, but I'm finally starting to put the car back together after a couple months. And I have a couple updates in regards to the build process. And the biggest one being me coming to the frustrating realization that in order for me to finish this car this year, there's no way in this short amount of time frame left that I'm going to be able to learn all the fabrication skills necessary to build this car at the caliber and quality that I want this car to be at. And so I decided to just put my ego to the side and partner with a local fabricator, GSK Fab. Amazing work that he does. I'll highlight some of the stuff that he's done and put his Instagram page up if you want to go check him out. But ultimately, I have an appointment on the 25th to drop off the car with basically everything put back together as far as drivetrain, suspension, subframes go. So that way he can start the fabrication work on the turbo kit, mounting a couple things here and there. And so today's the 17th, and that essentially gives me about a week's time to do all this. So let me show you at least where I'm at and the focus on this video. All right, so the goal for the video is putting the rear end back together. And so biggest update regarding parts is the Mazda subframe. I had Devin at GSK Fab weld in the Ronin 8.8 kit, which allows you to mount the Ford 8.8 differential into the Mazda subframe, which is going to give you the ability to run more power as well as better gearing ratios for the T56 transmission. And ultimately, I mean, this is what it comes down to. The first welds literally on this car are going to be this brace. And I didn't want my newbie welds to be literally the most structural component of the car. Last thing I need is for this, subframe to completely fall apart while I'm driving at the drag strip. And, who knows what kind of damage it would do to the car. But, what about, my safety, my passenger safety? So this is where we started talking about him actually getting the car back together as far as all the fabrication goes. And so in the previous video, you saw me talk about all the suspension. That's all cleaned up. Really the biggest update regarding some other stuff that I cleaned up are the rear knuckles and hubs. Fortunately enough, these are actually aluminum, including the dust shield. So I'm not gonna coat it with anything. I'm just gonna leave it the way it is. I'll show you a before and after. It's actually really crazy what they used to look like before. Love my sandblasting cabinet. And then I'll show you what I'm doing with the hardware. I have a couple clips that I recorded previously, which I'll show now. So imagine all this freshly installed, everything super clean, brand new bushings, new everything, but then you install it with that. I grabbed all the suspension related nuts and bolts and sandblasting every single one. And here, let me just open this up. So all the ones outside of the basket are finished and I just have one left. But this is just a quick example, and it's already kind of cleaned up from what it was looking like from just the sandblasting particles just moving around and kind of touching a little bit of everything. But everything is going to be brand new, right? So essentially like that, right? Nice and clean. There's a lot of different options in terms of recoding your hardware. And there's two main factors I really cared about. Number one was cost, because if you went down the route of electroplating, you need special equipment, you need special chemicals. It's kind of expensive to get started. So unless you're doing production work, it's not worth it. Then number two, I cared about how fast I can do this process on my own, right? And I didn't want it to be multiple steps in a process. I didn't want to have to do every single nut and bolt one by one. That would just take forever because I'm doing this to every single nut and bolt on the FD. So what I ended up finding was black oxide from Caswell. And this 1 pint is about 30 bucks. It's enough to probably do my car 2 or 3 times over. And it's a concentrate, so you simply dilute this in distilled water. That's the first step, to drop your hardware into that for 5 minutes. That's it. And then the second step is take it out, which by the way, you could do it in batches. So I'm doing my suspension components in one batch, interior in another batch, engine bay, etc., etc. And the second step is to add a sealant, which is something like a WD-40. And that's super cheap. You essentially just, spray your sealant on there and your hardware is good to go, ready to install. So here's the finish after about hour and a half in the sandblasting cabinet, doing every single one by one. The process overall should be really simple. I got 2 buckets. The first one is going to be the concentrate, diluted to 9:1 ratio. So I have 1,500 millimeters in there. 1,350 of that is distilled water. 150 of it is the actual black oxide concentrate. And then this is just the rinse bath of distilled water. So you're gonna take the nuts and bolts, drop it in. Recommendation is 30 seconds to 5 minutes. I'm just gonna leave it for the 5 minutes and see what happens. Rinse it off, and then you seal it, take them out of there and dry them off, and then seal it with some type of sealer. In this case, I'm gonna be using WD-40. That's kind of cool. You can see it's immediately turned black. Let's see if I can get a close-up. In the previous video, you just saw where everything was coated and you started to see the black oxide solution working. Off camera, I started to dry them and take a closer look, and I just wasn't super happy with the finish. And so ultimately I attributed that to prep. You need the hardware, whatever you're coating, to be basically spotless of any grease, grime, debris, even if it's not visible to the human eye. So I attributed contamination due to the sandblasting cabinet and possible particles from all the parts that I've been sandblasting. Now it's just a matter of letting the sealant kind of do its thing for some time. Okay, so it's Saturday and I need to deliver the car by Tuesday. And so I'm just gonna work off camera, try to get as much done as possible, and just show you the progress along the way. So right now, I got the subframe put back together. I'm gonna toss this into the car, mount everything up, and then from there, put the differential in. All right, finally got the subframe in. It took longer than expected because as you're kind of putting stuff in, you figure this new brace for the differential that was welded in might interfere with a couple of things. The biggest one is there's a bracket that went right there that I had to take off the spot welds. But besides that, everything's in, and now I'm just getting ready to toss the differential in. And the differential, I cleaned it up a little bit. The casing is aluminum, so I just took a wire wheel to it. Nothing too crazy, not perfect. It's a differential, it's not super important. Just needs to look clean, which it does. And then the front cover, also aluminum. I tossed that into the blasting cabinet, so that came out perfect, and put a bead of RTV on both sides. All right, so the rear end's complete because now I got the axles in. Everything's torqued to spec. All I gotta do now is just put the coilovers on so the rear end is finally finished. But ultimately, from here, I gotta go working on the front. No subframe in there yet. But this is gonna be where I wrap up for the day and for the video as well.